Turning to our next presentation by Nikiwe Veshe, it's entitled Land, Identity, and Agency, the Case of the Khomani San People of the Northern Cape, South Africa, from the 1930s. Nikiwe Lucretia Veshe was born and bred in, is it Randfontein? Randfontein, west of Johannesburg. She is currently pursuing her doctoral degree at Stellenbosch University History Department. Her academic interests are around notions of environmental humanities and social studies, subaltern studies, indigenous knowledge systems, animal studies, non-human agency, and how these themes have historically played a role in changing human societies, structures, and identity formation processes. Thank you, Nikiwe Veshe, for being with us. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience and the previous speakers. I am shaking, and I don't know if it's because I'm nervous or if it's because I'm cold, so I'm going to be standing up and sitting down every now and then. So my paper is part of my bigger project, which is my thesis. So I extracted some of this the data from my thesis to compile this paper, which is titled Land and Identity Reinventions. Can I have the mic? Because I think I need to stand up. So I was pretty shocked at how much there are similarities between the Palestinian issues and the South African history of apartheid. So for example, can you hear me? Okay, so for example, I learned during the past few days the Nakba started in 1948, which was the year in South Africa where apartheid also began. I learned from the speakers from yesterday that land appropriation was used and the Bible and religious beliefs were used to justify the taking away of people's homelands. We also had the same experience where national parks, for example, were used for land appropriation using the ideas of conservation of nature and heritage conservation as an excuse. I also learned that in the process of all of this, racial and population kind of erasures also happened as a result of all of this land appropriation. We also had the same issues. Although we may think as the outside world that apartheid has ended in South Africa, it hasn't really ended. And in order to tell these histories, I'm going to use the perspective of the Khomani San people of the Northern Cape, South Africa. So the Khomani San people are a very interesting case study. Where is they? They are a very interesting case study because they did not exist until 1994 with the land claim that they lodged against the Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park, this is the park. I must say that I don't really write about people. I like writing about parks, but you know that when you go into the field, you have certain ideas, and then you go into the field, you do your research, then you are forced to kind of alter your ideas, your research. So this is the Kgalagadi Transfrontier Park. This is South Africa, this is Botswana, this is Namibia. So the communities I'm talking about now are located in these regions, but I must also say that you find San communities all over this region, which is the Western Cape. Stellenbosch University is somewhere here, by the way. And then there are also some located here in Zimbabwe, also in Malawi and in Namibia as well. So this region would generally be the Kalahari Desert, which is where you find most of your San communities. So like I said, before 1994, the Khomani San community did not exist. They existed as a result of the land restitution legislations that we started having in South Africa after the apartheid ended, and we were now a democratic state on paper, really. So they are a combination of a few San communities located around these areas who were dispossessed in 1931 as a result of the establishment of the park that is inside the borders of South Africa, which is here. So the Khomani San community does not involve the San communities outside the borders. It's just those that are inside the borders of South Africa. So it's different clans within the San communities that came together to form a political identity, which is now known as the Khomani San. But within the political identity, they were forced to adopt a traditional and an ethnic kind of identity, which was based on the Bushman myth. I hope I'm making sense so far. What makes it interesting, like I said, is that, or what makes my paper interesting, I think, is because I try and not study San people as a single identity because they are different. I will use the name clan or tribes. They are a different, it's a combination of different clans who came together and established this political identity, which now we know as the Khomani San. And because of that, there are conflicts within the community itself, but also between the people who write about San, which is mostly us academics, the media, and also the government officials. And in this paper, I'm going to show how different key role players have thought and written about the San communities over the decades and how these ideas have changed or endured over time. I analyzed the discourses of organic biological identity, belonging to the land, and other ideas about identity, coupled to these ideas about performed ethnicity and invented traditions. So for example, the government had different ideas about who is the San and what makes a San person. And I'm going to use the word San and Bushman interchangeably. I'm aware of the politics of identity and naming and nomenclature attached to this, but I use this because during the years before the 1990s, the word Bushman is the one that exists a lot in the archives. It's the word that was mostly used. And then after the 1970s in particular, where the social sciences started becoming a thing in academia, and there were debates about how certain terms kind of undermine certain people or are insulting, then San or Khoisan started becoming a more suitable name to group these people. But I've also learned during my field work that people don't really identify themselves like this. I've been doing my field work in the Northern Cape for a few months now, and nobody actually identifies as a San. But when you come in as a researcher and ask, so what do you identify as? And then a person will say, whatever you want me to be. So we have learned that by government officials, I mean the different colonial powers we've had interactions with, the early Dutch settlers, which became the Afrikaners later on, and also the British. We learned that pre the 1800s, San people were understood by government officials, colonial government officials, as competitors for access to land, hence the massacres, the conflict. I've learned that conflict is not the right word to use. These justified the violence against the San people, the competition for resources, especially in a place like the Kalahari, where there is a limitation of resources. And so we learn in the early 1990s that these attitudes were starting to kind of change to become a bit softer with the British administration. And it's because later in the 1800s, they were starting to kind of appear some reports on the extinction of the Bushman race. But how this extinction happened, it's actually quite extraordinary because the people are still there, but they aren't, in that the law forbade people from identifying as San, so they were forced to assimilate into other identities. So if you say you are San, then you could face imprisonment or other violent experiences. So they went extinct, but not really. They were still there, but the law did not recognize them till to this day. In South Africa, it's either you are white, African, Indian, colored, or other. And they do not provide space for you to specify what other is. So you can either choose to be other or colored. And over there, especially with the apartheid government, the San communities were forced into the identity of colored. So we see in the early 1900s to late 1900s, white attitudes of the San had shifted from economic competitors and threat to wildlife conservation initiatives to a people in distress who needed to be saved by colonial administrators. The second one is the medium. I loved the presentation by the previous speaker because it captured the role of the media in the formation of societies and how it can heal or also destroy societies. So one of the most famous, I'm just going to show the next slide for the sake of time. So one of the most famous, I don't know what's happening. Oh, yes, yes. One of the most famous films that capture the formation of Bushmen identities and the Bushman myth is the, I hope we all know this movie because it's very famous in South Africa, The Gods Must Be Crazy, which was released in 1984. So what we do not know about this movie, which R.B. Lee talks extensively about, is that when this movie was shot, the San people in the movie were forced to get rid of their jeans, get rid of their sandals, get rid of whatever modern commodities they had, and now go back to the trunks that they had long time deserted to kind of take out the loincloths and the bows and arrows, which they did not use anymore. So the media has also played part in freezing the Bushman people into the past. And I go further to argue that this freezing of Bushman identities has continued to force them further and further into the margins of society. Therefore, this paper discusses the making of Bushman identities as a class struggle rather than an ethnicity or a racial one. Scholars, us, we have also played a part in the perpetuation of the Bushman myth, which has contributed or further perpetuated the marginalization of San people by also pushing them into the Bushman myth framework and studying them as a single identity kind of group. So we too have also contributed into that, but I do not mean to undermine the recent scholarly sect where people are talking about the revisionist scholars of identity, of San identity populations. So therefore, for example, when you think about the San people, I'm sure this is the picture that comes to mind. This is the picture that came to mind to me too when I went into the field. I was so surprised that this is what I actually found. And I asked them about it. What is this? What is this? They said to me, oh, that's just our traditional attire. I said, how? Why? And then the other guy said to me, the same way Zulu people dress like this and used to dress like this, but now they've modified it or modernized it to this, and nobody questions their authenticity as Zulu people. It's the same way people should allow that. We don't dress like that anymore. We don't hunt anymore because we've got access to resources. We don't use bows and arrows anymore. And it doesn't make us any less San or any less Bushmen. So my paper, therefore, makes the argument that the identity of San, as we have come to know them as hunters and gatherers, as the foragers of Africa, and the link to the Stone Age people, is a result of constant renegotiation, reinvention, and reimagination of the San by outsiders due to land politics in the Kalahari region over time. These myths representations were also in some instances adopted by the San themselves. For example, if you do not practice bows and arrows or traditional Sanness, you cannot claim the land in the Kalahari because you are not an authentic San person. So my argument is that land played a major role in the representations of San people by different role players throughout history, and these narratives are not yet prevalent in identity and nomenclature studies of San people. But instead, much research focuses on land and identity laws. So what this paper does different is it brings forth the narrative of land and identity inventions. Thank you very much.